Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichan. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. As always, you can tweet us your questions using the hashtag #BestQuestions, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show. Today, we're going to be focusing on player development and the future prospects of some of our young Pelicans. We'll be examining Saints running backs Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram in our Saints State of the Franchise positional breakdowns, and we'll tackle this week's best questions on Zion Williamson, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, the Honey Badger, and the Saints' best team of all time. But let's tip off with the story of the week, and that is interim Pelicans GM Danny Ferry. He spoke to the media about our goals for the rest of the season, and he said that the focus is going to be more on developing longer-term pieces. And this includes cutting minutes for stars like Jrue Holiday and Anthony Davis. And Michael, I want to get your thoughts on some of the younger guys. What kind of things are we looking for specifically in terms of player development?
Yeah, so Kenrich Williams, we talked about him a little bit the last podcast. There are some things that I really like foundationally about how he plays. So his nickname was actually Kenny Hustle in college. So he's a guy who works really hard. He looks like he might develop a good three-point shot. Currently, he doesn't have a great three-point shot. It's decent enough. I think he's young enough to where he could still work on it. That's actually something that typically younger players will improve their shooting as their careers progress. What concerns me a little bit is that his free throw shooting has never been very good. So he's been below 70% for both his college career and his NBA career. And that's actually a pretty good indicator of how good of a shooter someone can be. So they found a lot of correlation between how good of a free throw shooter someone is and how well they wind up shooting threes in the NBA. So his three-point shot by itself looks decent enough. He looks like he catches in rhythm. He looks like he's someone who has a pretty good feel for the game. He's had about a 2-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio for both college and his pro career. So I mean, he's an intelligent guy. There's some things though that the question is obviously what kind of role is he going to play? And so when you're looking at a team like this that's not winning a whole lot of games and probably won't be for the rest of the year, you want to look at what kind of role is he in right now, and then what kind of role is he going to be in on a good team. And at least at this juncture, I think he's someone who is much more of a role player than someone who could become anything more than that.
It seems like he could be giving the Pelicans a really nice spark off the bench. You always want the players who are able to come off the bench, when everybody else is tired and really have a lot of energy and be able to kind of out-hustle everybody. But I do want to ask, where did this guy come from?
Yeah, so this guy actually wasn't even drafted last year, but we wound up signing him after the fact. And that's, that we talked about the second round and what that usually brings in terms of talent. So there's not, usually if you're going to be an elite NBA player, there's a very high probability that you've been drafted in the first round. And not only that, probably in the first half of the first round. So when you're looking at these guys, especially people who are 24 years old, like Kenrich Williams is, he's a rookie, but he's 24. He's much older than several players on the Pelicans who aren't rookies. So you would expect him to already be more polished.
I believe Anthony Davis is only 25 years old, right?
Yeah, so Davis is only a year older than Kenrich Williams.
It seems like Kenrich Williams is just, this young, bright-eyed rookie. But Davis has been playing for like 7 years in the NBA, and he's only a year older than Kenrich Williams. But anyway, I think that Williams has a pretty decent future. But I do tend to agree with you, even though he started out getting a lot of hype. You kind of cooled me off on him, and I think it was 2 episodes ago in this podcast, and now it seems like he is starting to develop. Not necessarily in terms of a starter, but a pretty strong role player. I hope that he does have a bright future on this team, even if it is somebody coming off the bench.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to consider in all of this is that most NBA players belong. So, I mean, they belong where they are. The question is, what kind of contracts can you sign them to? So, I mean, ultimately, most NBA players are replaceable. So what you're really looking for is a couple of things. A guy who could maybe develop into a star at some point, or someone who maybe you can get on an affordable contract. Because if you have, it's all about value. So if you have players who are worth more than their contracts indicate, then that's more money for you to spend elsewhere that you wouldn't have. And that's really where you get into, it's not really just about Kenrich Williams as the player, it's about what kind of player is he, for what kind of money is he earning. And he's not earning a lot right now. We have him for a very manageable contract next year as well, should we choose to keep him, which I think we will. So those are the kinds of things that you should be looking at when we're evaluating players, not just how they're actually playing.
Now, what's Cheick Diallo's contract situation? I know he's been on the team for a while, and there was a lot of hype around him kind of early in his career as a long-term developmental guy. I know he's playing well lately, but how is he progressing in your mind?
He's a tough one. So Cheick is still very, very raw. He's someone who was really, so just like Kenrich Williams, he's also someone who has a reputation for hustling a lot. If you watch him for just even 10 seconds in the NBA, you can tell that he works really hard, sometimes to his own disadvantage, because he's sort of running around out there without a whole lot of awareness. I think he's gotten a lot better. I still have some questions about what kind of position he would wind up playing if he ever became anything other than a bench player. I think he's probably slotted to be someone who sort of, as you said, Kenrich Williams, I think he could be a guy off the bench where you put him in for maybe 10 or 15 minutes a night and he just wears down opponents because he works so hard. That is a valuable thing. That's no knock against Cheick Diallo. He's been awesome recently with his rebounding. But if you look at it, especially predicting rebounding or anything, he's way outperforming his per minute averages for the rest of his career, at least in the most recent spurt. So I would take all of the stats that you're seeing with a grain of salt.
His per 36, he's averaging 23 points a game, 19 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks a game in the last 4 games. Those numbers are obviously insane, and they're even better than Anthony Davis's numbers, and he's kind of been filling in for Davis. But, of course, like you said, this is only a 4-game sample size. He's playing well lately, and I also wanted to suggest that, rebounds kind of seem like I wouldn't say an all-hustle stat, but I think in the NBA, you could definitely pad some rebounding stats with hustling, because not every guy hustles on defense in the NBA, especially during the regular season, I'll say. And if you have a guy like Diallo who's willing to go all out.
Yeah, he works really hard, and rebounds, like you're saying, they're at least somewhat of a function of how hard you're working. They're also really a function about how close you are to the basket. Your proximity to the goal at any given point is going to strongly impact your rebounding. So I remember a few years ago, DeAndre Jordan was playing for Doc Rivers, and I want to say his rebounding per minute averages skyrocketed. And it was because Doc didn't ask him to step up in the pick and roll and defend. So he was always fairly close to the basket. And he's an elite athlete. So if you put him near the basket, and they're going to miss shots eventually, and he's going to grab them most of the time because no one really can jump with him. I think he is a good rebounder. I just, there are other things that I want to see. I want to see how smart of a team defender is he? Is he someone who's staying disciplined within the context of the defense, or is he chasing things? Because that can be a problem. You can get a ton of blocks or steals or whatever, but if you get 2 blocks and 2 steals a game, that looks great. But for the other 60, 70 possessions that you might be in, if you're basically deserting your responsibilities, right, that's a real problem, and that might not show in your basic stats, but it might show somewhere else.
Any statistic that's given, you really want to look at the context of all these, of course, and not everybody has time to go watch the games and look at every single counting stat and make sure that that the steal or the block was actually attributed to him. But sometimes people can create statistics when they fail at their job, if that makes sense. Like some steals are lucky.
Yeah.
Some steals are created by when other people really cause the steal, and Diallo just happens to be in the right place at the right time. So, and again, it's only 4-game sample size, but do you see Diallo starting next year for this Pelicans team, or is he always going to be more of a role player?
Look, he's 22 years old, so I'm not going to write him off yet, but if you're talking about whether I've seen enough to start him for 82 games a year for anywhere even north of 24 minutes per game and be extremely confident, I don't feel that. What happens when he's facing some of the higher tier centers in this league? That's something where I feel like he could probably get taken advantage of. You even saw he didn't play a whole lot against Marjanovic, at least at the beginning of the game. And Marjanovic is so big, man. That guy's like 7'3", and Cheick is long. But you can only make up so much. And the question is he a 4? Is he a 5? And if he's a 4, he doesn't really have the skill set of a more modern NBA 4. And if he's a 5, he's probably a little bit undersized, at least on the weight side of things. So those are the kind of things that I would be looking at.
A 4 and a 5, kind of a mix between a power forward and a center there. Jahlil Okafor, he's somebody who also kind of needs to find his role. He's always been more of an offensive player, even at Duke. He's always been more of an offensive player than a defensive stud. What are your feelings on him? I know he's missed the last couple of games with injuries.
I think, I definitely think they'll pick up his option for next year. So they actually signed him with a team option for next year over the last summer, and he's on a very manageable contract given what he's shown us. So Okafor had some trouble in Philly, and he's kind of bounced around. He's certainly someone who he played for the Brooklyn Nets last year as well, and he hasn't shown a ton, at least previous to coming to the Pelicans. I actually think he's been pretty good. I think if you look at the players that we've discussed already, or any young player on the Pelicans roster outside of Anthony Davis, I think he might have the best chance of developing to be a star. I'm not putting Randall in this analysis, but I do think that Okafor, in theory, could wind up being a star. A lot would have to go right. But if you look at his skill set, he's just so big. He's so strong. He's got a good handle. He knows how to get to the rim. That's the kind of person where I could see him putting up 20 points a night, 22 points a night on a good team. The defense, like you said, is the question mark, and that's something to where maybe he doesn't ever develop that, and that might be what inhibits him from becoming the player that he could be, because he has a lot of things that are good. I think his side-to-side mobility could be improved. That's something that might be a little bit more difficult to help him on. I think that it's something to where his awareness isn't what it's supposed to be. That's common of all young players on NBA defenses, so that's not something I would indict him for, but it's not been good enough to warrant putting him out there. And again, you can look no further than his history to see that he does have the talent. There's no reason that he shouldn't be starting except for his defense. So that's what I would be looking for, is how aware is he as a second defender? Is he someone who's helping a lot? Is he someone who can get out and defend the perimeter? All those things, like you said, defense is what I'm looking for, and that's the questions that I would have.
What about Frank Jackson? He's the youngest of the players we've mentioned so far. He's only 20 years old. We drafted him. He was pretty good in college, but he's kind of had a slow start to his career, and now he's getting a little more playing time now that Elfrid Payton has been hurt. But has he really done anything to impress you this year?
Not a lot. When I look at Frank Jackson, the one thing, there is one thing that's impressed me, and I think Frank Jackson could wind up being someone who's very, very good chasing people around screens. He moves really well. He's an explosive player. He's extremely determined to get through screens. Another one of these hustle guys that I think I love it. I love watching him fight around picks. I think the thing that he's going to have to work on is he's going to have to find some way to become more impactful on offense, because he's an undersized guard. He's not really big enough to play shooting guard, but he's not really good enough of a point guard to be a true point guard. So on defense, you're already, even if he becomes what I think he could become, which is a very good defender, I think he would probably limit him to defending point guards and possibly smaller shooting guards. Now on offense, the problem that he has is he's more or less relegated to spot-up duty right now. I don't think he's that great at creating his own shot, which is usually an indicator of a very good player, is if he can create his own shot very well. He's going to have some trouble because of his size finishing at the rim. So what he's going to need to do is he's going to need to learn how to change pace. And he's probably also going to have to develop a good floater game, something in the in-between, to where if he's driving, he's not just going to the rim every single time, because he's just not, despite his run and jump ability, I don't think he's going to be able to finish at the rim versus NBA length.
Does he have a three-point shot?
Yeah, he's a pretty good spot-up shooter. I don't think he's someone who's ever going to be pulling up like Steph Curry or anything, but I think if you put him in spot-up duty, I think he catches in rhythm. I think he's got really good balance. I think he's going to wind up being a solid shooter, maybe in the 37-38% range. I think it'll be something to where he's going to be good off the ball. The question is, when he does get chased off that three-point line, is he going to have enough of a scoring game to get his own shot off? And again, that comes from he needs to be able to get the big guys to draw them away from the goal with his floater game. And then once he does that, he'll have easier routes to finishing at the rim. And that's to me where you need to see more from him.
I was reading an article the other day, and I wish I had the numbers on me, but the premise of the article was based on how the Pelicans success or lack thereof in the last 2 years has really been predicated or determined by the Pelicans' point guard's health. And there was a statistic in there saying that when Rondo and Elfrid Payton in the last 2 years have been healthy, so Rondo last year and Payton this year, the Pelicans are like 17 games over 500, if I'm not mistaken. And when they are not healthy, when one of them has been out, like as we know, Payton has missed a lot of games this year. Rondo missed some games last year. But when their starting point guard has been out, they are the same under 500. They're about 17 games under 500. What is your take on – do you think Elfrid Payton's really that valuable to the team, or do you think it's just point guard in general, just having that quarterback of the offense there?
So first of all, I wasn't aware of that stat. That's kind of crazy. I know that obviously this year they've been much better when they've had Payton. I think it doesn't really speak to Payton's actual ability. I think it really speaks to, one, having a point guard in place to where Drew can just focus on scoring. Drew is just a much better player in general when he's not tasked with the playmaking duties for everybody. When he can just look for his own shot, it allows him to focus more on defense. I think, man, as an actual player, Payton's kind of hard to figure out. And Payton's still not able to be a very good shooter. I think it's something to where he's going to have to figure that out at some point to become the player that he would want to become. He's got really solid size and mobility for a guard. I think he's someone who could check 2 positions and possibly 3 at a pinch on defense when he develops into the player that I think he could be. So those are the things that I see when I see Payton. I see a guy who needs the ball in his hands a decent bit to be impactful on offense. I see someone who could become a good multi-positional guard defender on defense. So, I mean, there are things to like about him, but he's also, his contract is over at the end of this year. We don't have bird rights on him. So I don't know what kind of contract he's getting, but he's someone who I could see either staying or going.
Okay, so I take it to be that he's probably going to leave if I had to guess. Do you think his defensive game is ahead of his offensive game or vice versa?
Yeah, I think he's good enough finishing at the rim. I mean, what he's really benefited from when Davis was here, Payton was able to get to the rim without a whole lot of traffic because no one's leaving Davis to defend Payton because Davis is a lob threat that he is. So I think he's somewhat benefited from Davis's ability to draw not even draw second defenders, but really just to be a lob threat. I think that if he went somewhere with a more packed paint, you might see more results similar to what he had in Orlando or in Phoenix. I think his ability to be effective is going to be dependent upon how many shooters he has around him and whether he has a lob threat that's going to keep people from double teaming him as it goes to the rim, because he is big. So he does have a size advantage over many point guards. So if he gets a one-on-one and he gets a clear lane, he's able to throw his body into his guy well enough and he's quick enough to get to the rim and to finish while there. And so I as far as the question goes, I would say he's still probably a little bit better a defender than he is an offensive player. I think it'll probably stay that way for the majority of his career too.
Elfrid Payton and Julius Randle, two guys who have been very productive for the Pelicans when they've been on the court. Who do you think is more likely to remain a Pelican next year? And who would you rather?
I think that I would rather keep Randle. I hate keep saying this, but I don't like saying how just people are not good team defenders, but a lot of our guys are not good team defenders, hence the fact that our team defense is bad. So Randle is someone who I really like because of the way that he plays is so against the grain of today's NBA. I think it's great to have guys that are big who can take any switch that they get and just bully that guy under the goal. And that's what makes Randle different from a lot of other fours that are in today's NBA, is that Randle is just so big, so strong. He's got really good mobility. He's got a good handle. He's someone who can just throw smaller players under the basket if they switch on him. And I think that really helps your offense in its ability to run the way that you want it to run, because all of a sudden, if you could switch on someone else who's not a post-up threat, you can't do that against Randle, because even if he doesn't get the ball, he won't be posting up, obviously, but he's going to throw whoever's on him under the goal, and he's going to get an offensive rebound. So I think having that kind of weapon on your team is really good. As far as who would be more likely to re-sign, I think that Randle's just a better player. So I think that the odds of him staying are slimmer than someone like Payton, especially since we have bird rights on neither of them. I think that someone like Payton could come back on a manageable contract. I think he's played his way into a few more million than he earned last summer. I think that Randall is someone who could cost a lot more, and the team would have to really think about whether they want him to be a part of the team moving forward.
Right. And I am excited to get your take in the third quarter when I'm very curious to get your take on whether you think these young Pelicans are actually playing harder when Anthony Davis is off the court. But we'll wait for the third quarter to get to that. For the second quarter, we're going to go through our second part of our Saints State of the Franchise, where we go over each position, one per podcast, and we're going to break down and give the analysis of individual performances, where they stand going forward. Last week, we talked about the Saints' offensive line, and today, right after this break, we're going to hit running backs. Stay tuned. Are you looking for something fun to do this weekend? Make the drive to the Instigator Ranch and Hatchery in Covington, Louisiana. Home of more than 2,000 alligators, a guided tour gives you the opportunity to observe and learn all about these unique creatures. You can hold small alligators and alligator eggs in your hands while a baby gator hatches from it. Seriously, it's incredibly wild. These tours are year-round and under $20. The Instigator Ranch has 4.8 stars on Yelp and is 99% rated on Groupon. Experience the life of Louisiana's most ancient residents. Check out the Instigator Ranch in Covington.
Nick, before we get into talking about Mark Ingram and his impending free agency, I want to talk a little bit about Alvin Kamara and what he means to this offense. We had kind of talked about it a little bit last week in our fourth quarter about how important he is to the team. So let's go into a little bit more detail about it. So how important is Kamara to this team, and how good was he last year?
Kamara is a really, really special player, and that's tough to say for running backs in this league because running backs are just so replaceable now. But his ability allows our offense to do so many things. He's very versatile, obviously, but he's got amazing balance. He's elusive. He's got like an effortless glide when he runs. He sheds tackles, elite ability catching the football, and such a smooth route runner. And he's just a huge mismatch for linebackers, really, and safeties who are trying to cover him. And, you know, even when the Saints can't get him going in the ground game, like you see games like against the Rams, he wasn't doing much on the ground game. The Rams have really smothered our running game. You know, Kamara caught, 12-plus passes in that game and, for almost 100 yards. And he's just somebody who's always seems like he's getting open when you allow him to. And he's just so tough to tackle in the open field. So much stronger than people really give him credit for. And he was really kind of, I wouldn't say he was a diamond in the rough coming out of college, but the Saints did such a great job of trading up for him. We gave up our second-round pick when we drafted him 2 years ago. And a lot of people at the time said, oh, that's way too much to give up for a running back. And he ends up being a perfect fit for the offense.
What impresses me most about him is I don't think I've ever seen someone who doesn't lose speed in their cuts like he does. Like when he cuts, he doesn't lose any speed whatsoever. You sort of talked about his balance already and his strength, his ability to shed tackles, but it just absolutely floors me to watch him when he cuts. It's just like he hasn't even shifted directions at all. He's just running so fast in between them that it makes him sort of special, and it makes him extremely hard to catch.
I know. He's able to get lateral to north and south very, very quickly, pretty much at the same speed like you're saying. And also, when he's breaking an arm tackle or something like that, he also doesn't lose speed. The one knock that I have on Kamara, there's so many times last year, a handful of times at least, that he'll be within a yard or two of the first down marker, and he won't reach out for the first down. He'll just kind of run out of bounds. And I know that he's trying to just, avoid being tackled, but it kind of goes to my next point. I think the one knock on Kamara is, and we haven't seen it yet, but the one knock that he could have is his durability. Kamara has never carried the ball 20 times in his career, including college. And there has to be a reason for that.
Well, how many games has he missed?
He hasn't missed any. That's the thing. So it's tough to knock his durability, but it is, I guess my point is that it seems like he does need to be in some type of running back by committee for him to be fully effective and maybe fully efficient.
So, how many running backs do you think that are capable of doing it without help?
He's capable from a talent perspective of doing it all by himself because he's so versatile. But in terms of a durability standpoint, not many, to be honest. I mean, you have your Ezekiel Elliott's out there. I would have said the same thing about Todd Gurley until we saw C.J. Anderson just kind of, ruin that notion. But in the playoffs, but there's only a handful of running backs who are actually able to get 300 or so touches a year now. And a lot of teams are just realizing that it's not as efficient and not as safe for them to do so. And a lot of teams are now realizing that, it's more about the scheme, it's more about the offensive line, and it's less really about the running back's ability. And as we're going into a more pass-first league, running backs are becoming less and less valuable.
In terms of evaluating him right now, I think it makes a lot of sense, the way they're treating him, the way that he is running out of bounds, the way that he's only running the ball a certain amount of times a game. I think, but to your point, moving forward, when you're looking at handing in the next contract, that's when it really becomes important, because if he's going to have some bloated contract that's going to prevent us from, if he still needs someone else, then you're not just paying for his contract, but you're paying for someone on top of that. And then we're going to be losing money elsewhere that we could be spending. I think it's a good point to be raised.
Right, and we're able to take advantage of his contract right now because he's on that rookie wage scale, and he's only making $1 million next year. And it sounds like a lot to us, but it's crazy. Alvin Kamara is taking up 0.55% of our cap. Alvin Kamara, 0.55% of our cap. So it's really insane. But like I said, and like you're alluding to, it always seems like the Saints have been trying to make sure that Kamara is splitting work. Like even when Ingram was suspended for the first 4 games of the season for performance-enhancing drugs, Ingram was out for the first 4 games, but Peyton didn't really want to commit to Kamara getting all of those touches. And there were games where Kamara got a lot of total touches, but again, never received 20 carries in a game. And when they were back, when Ingram came back, Kamara was playing about 31 to 51 snaps a game with an average of about 40 snaps a game. And in that same time, Ingram was playing about 20 to 33 snaps a game with an average of about 28 snaps a game. So for the most part, the Saints' optimal sharing of the 2 running backs was Kamara is getting about 40 snaps a game and Ingram is getting about 28 snaps a game. And that seems about right in order to keep Kamara fresh and to keep him healthy and to keep both of these running backs efficient.
I'd love to see at some point if someone just did a graph of all these sort of star running backs and then showed as their carries per year increase. So like as the year is progressing, watch their actual carries go up. And then watch how their yards per carry changes with that to see like what kind of effect these kind of loads have on running backs. Because it's just an interesting point. And like you said, it's so interesting to look at running backs in today's NFL and how coaches and teams are sort of shifting towards the mentality that it's more about scheme and offensive line, like you're saying. So it just fascinates me. I think it's a really cool thing to look at.
We've actually seen just in years 1 and 2, Kamara's yards per carry, just in terms of his rushes, has declined. I mean, he was over 6.0 yards per carry in his first year, in his rookie year. Last year, he was at 4.6. And unfortunately for the Saints really couldn't get their running game going in the playoffs. Mark Ingram and Kamara both struggled in the playoffs, both playoff games. And Ingram actually did average, a lot of Saints fans don't know this, but Ingram actually averaged 4.7 yards a carry last year, which is actually 0.1 more than Kamara in terms of, Ingram had a better yards per carry than Kamara on the ground last year. But of course, Kamara is obviously the more versatile player and better player because, Kamara had 81 catches. He was targeted 105 times. Kamara is probably one of 2 running backs in the entire NFL. Actually, I'll say 3. 3 running backs in the entire NFL right now who could probably go for 1,000 rushing yards in a season and 1,000 receiving yards in a single season. That's only been done twice in NFL history. One was Marshall Faulk, and he's kind of the standard for that dual threat running back. But David Johnson, Christian McCaffrey for Carolina, and Alvin Kamara, obviously for the Saints, I think those are the only 1,000 and 1,000 club that we would have.
I'd also love to see like how Kamara would be affected if we threw deep more and if Breeze were better at throwing deep. I mean, I don't mean to knock Breeze because he's amazing, but I mean if there were because there were times where it seemed like teams had a lot of people up front against us and they weren't really worried about the deep ball as much. I don't know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I do wonder because you have less space there. So I'd love to see Kamara in more open space if we could throw better deep. And I mean, is that a thing for you, or do you feel like he's so well suited for everything that we're doing with him that it doesn't matter?
I believe that it's kind of a thing. I do believe that the Saints' offensive struggles in the latter third portion of the season were slightly based on Drew Brees' tired arm, maybe, or for lack of better words, the lack of attempts that we were pushing the ball downfield. And some of that was Teron Armstead's injury. We talked about some of that was Ted Ginn being hurt for a large portion of the season. But, and Traquan Smith didn't develop as fast as we wanted to him as a rookie, maybe. But at the same time, Kamara is a guy who, even if the Saints aren't spreading the safeties very deep, Kamara is a guy who can really open up the defense by mid-range routes and just kind of using him as in the flat. I mean, Kamara caught 81 of the 105 passes attempted to him. I mean, Breeze was just so good at getting him the ball. And that, we use Kamara in a variety of different ways to where, sometimes we would run him down the seam, like right at the safeties, and other times we would just run him way on the outside. We use him in screens and hitches. Sometimes we'd use him just like a receiver. So he's just such a versatile option that I don't think it's that big of a deal that we weren't able to throw deep in terms of opening up Kamara. But I certainly do think that for other running backs who are maybe less versatile than Kamara, who can really kind of maybe only run between tackles, I do think that they have to worry about the safeties kind of creeping up more. But if you creep up your safeties too much against Kamara, Kamara is actually the guy himself that can beat you deep. We saw that against the Steelers. Yeah, you saw that against the Steelers when it was kind of a B.S. pass interference penalty. It was a crucial moment of the game, but it was that play when in the end zone where it was like a 40-yard pass where Breeze kind of chunked it to him, and it was underthrown. I'm not trying to cause any controversy with Breeze's arm, but it was underthrown. And Kamara made a decent play on the ball, but he drew a pass interference penalty, and that was kind of an example of him kind of burning the safeties, if you.
I know I'm going to catch crap for saying that Breeze couldn't throw deep, or he wasn't as good at throwing deep as some other quarterbacks. So I love Breeze, just putting it out there.
He's deadly accurate in the intermediate range and in the short range. But I do think it's absolutely worth discussing and worth mentioning. The latter third of the season, I think that was a big part of why our offense wasn't as elite as it was in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, let's switch to Ingram, too, because we talked a little bit about Kamara, and we actually talked about Ingram a little bit last week, I think, in the fourth quarter. But, I mean, so he's a free agent. Do you think he's going to re-sign? And then, two, for how much, if he does re-sign?
Well, he's already playing the poker game with his agent. He already is, I don't know if it's a bluff or not, but he already said, as a quote, "I'm not afraid to bet on myself," which generally means, I'm not afraid to test the market and, potentially sign with a new team to prove my worth. The last time we signed Ingram, it was in 2015, and we gave him a 4-year, $16 million deal. I think that Ingram probably, I don't want to say really outplayed his deal, but he was worth his weight in that deal. Because you got to recall, Ingram's actually a really important locker room guy, great presence. He's a team leader. The team loves him. And, I mean, you could just see in the locker room, they were throwing parades when he got back from his suspension. The fans love him too. He's just a very beloved player for the Saints. And I certainly don't want to imagine him in another uniform, especially because, like we mentioned, his chemistry with Alvin Kamara is exceptional, and they also just kind of work together really well. Your classical thunder and lightning. But certainly at age 29, I could see Ingram signing a similar deal to when he did in 2015. I would hope it would be a team-friendly deal, like a 3 or 4 year deal worth maybe $3 or $4 million a year. So if we signed him to another 4-year, $16 million deal, I'd hope it'd be a little less than that, but I understand from Ingram's perspective, there are certainly teams that would want a guy like Mark Ingram on their team.
So, is there someone in free agency? Is there someone in the draft that you think the Saints could get in case Ingram doesn't resign?
Right. Well, it's probably not going to be the draft because, like we mentioned a couple times on this podcast, the Saints don't have a first-round pick this year. Not that we would even use that on a running back, of course, but we don't have a first-round pick this year. We also don't have a third-round pick this year, and we don't have a fourth-round pick this year. So very limited in terms of draft capital. And also, we're only expected to have about $9 million in salary cap, and that's if the salary cap goes to a projected $190 million per team. So assuming that happens, we still probably won't be spending a premium capital on a running back, knowing that we already have Alvin Kamara. In terms of other running backs I could foresee the Saints sign, I think Spencer Ware, former LSU running back, I don't think the Chiefs are going to re-sign him, especially considering how Damian Williams did in the playoffs. I think Spencer Ware, if he can prove that he's healthy enough, he would complement Alvin Kamara nicely. Another guy I think would complement Kamara nicely is Jay Ajayi out of Philadelphia, and he had some spurts in Miami where he looked like he was the next big thing, but doesn't catch the ball well, wouldn't be as versatile as Ingram is in that respect. But, that's what we have Kamara for, and I do think that Ajayi would complement Kamara as well. So those are two kind of guys I would look for to potentially pair with Kamara, because I don't think they're going to be very expensive, and I don't foresee the Saints spending more than about $3 million a year on a running back when we could obviously just re-sign Ingram.
Are there teams that you feel like are a big threat to the Saints in terms of re-signing Ingram? Anybody who would have their eye on him? Or
certainly, I think the Baltimore Ravens are in need of a running back. The Buffalo Bills, I think LaShawn McCoy, if he's going to stay there, he might retire even. The Miami Dolphins certainly need a running back. The New York Jets have a lot of cap room. They could sign Ingram. They just got rid of Isaiah Crowell. The Philadelphia Eagles are in search of a running back. And the one team in our division I would watch out for, Tampa Bay drafted Ronald Jones last year. But Ronald Jones didn't really do much in his rookie year, and he's kind of a smaller player, and he's kind of more of a receiving running back. I could see Ingram kind of pairing with Ronald Jones there to give a good 1-2 punch in Tampa Bay. Before we start the next quarter, guys, there's a difference between having insurance and actually being insured. If you want to feel secure about the things you care about most, State Farm agent Josh Loranda will have you covered. Over 10 years of experience, quality customer service, great communication, and no gimmicks. His branch is located right here in Mid-City, New Orleans, and he's my go-to for auto, homeowners, life, flood, and renter's insurance. Do something today that your future self will thank you for. You can email Josh directly at josh@sfmidcity.com for a free quote. Or you can find him on Facebook at Josh Lorando State Farm Agent. Josh Lorando, State Farm Agent. All right, and we can't do a podcast, at least lately, without talking about Anthony Davis. So I got to bring him up here in the third quarter. I want an update on what's going on here. I've noticed that he's been playing about 20 minutes on average. He's missed a game or two here and there since his trade demand. And it almost seems like the Pelicans and the NBA, maybe they haven't reached a deal behind closed curtains, but it kind of seems like the tensions are dying down there. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the truth. I don't know where that's coming from. It certainly seems like they did some vetting of the rules or whatever the Pelicans did, and Danny Ferry went on record and just said that there basically seems to be a rule against sitting him entirely and that they have to abide by it. I still think the whole thing's ridiculous, but it does feel different. Like there doesn't seem to be the same kind of tension.
Right.
I think despite the fact that the team isn't playing great, I think they're playing pretty hard. I think it's been fun to watch some of the younger players develop and at least have some chances to show what they have. So it seems like things are diffusing a little bit.
I think so too, and which is great for the NBA. It's great for all parties, to be honest, but it's especially great for the NBA because I didn't think that they wanted this type of controversy, and I think they've kind of accepted the fact that the Pelicans season is now washed, for lack of better words, or just maybe focusing on player development, if you will. And it seems like we even told the NBA he was going to rest for the game against the Los Angeles Lakers. And he did sit out that game for rest purposes, and the NBA had no problems with it. Are you curious that it came against the Lakers of all teams? Or should I not read too much into that?
I think you should definitely read into that. I don't think it was an accident. The whole thing, I mean, it's actually funny again. So whoever is in charge of the Pelicans social media probably has very little to do with who's making decisions. And I don't think it was a directive, but they gave some pretty petty tweets after the game. I loved every minute of it.
So they were giving them crap.
It was hilarious. Oh, dude, well, they were giving the Lakers so much crap about beating them because the Lakers are trying to make the playoffs right now. Right. And now there was a really good Onion article about how the best way to show teammates you believe in them is to have a cascading series of events where you basically try to throw them away to other teams and basically joking about how LeBron was trying to trade all their players. And I think the whole thing has been great because they tried to force the Pelicans into trading against what was good for them. They're all upset that we didn't do it. And I think the whole thing is ridiculous. And it sort of feels like they think they're entitled to something because they're the Lakers. And to watch them struggle as they've struggled after all of this is, I got to admit, it
feels good.
The part of me that I'm not as proud of, oh man, it feels great. It's been great to watch. And they were saying, the social media thing was basically saying, the Pelicans won, quote unquote, in good faith. And that was a big thing is that the Lakers said that the Pelicans weren't doing good faith negotiations when they were talking about Davis. So all kinds of little subtle jabs. And I loved every minute of it.
Do you think it's possible that, I'm not saying the NBA is involved, but do you think it's possible that LeBron James called up Anthony Davis and said something along the lines of, hey, I'm trying to push for the playoffs here. Would you the game you're going to rest? Would you mind it being against the Lakers?
I think it was the second half of back-to-back. So I think that was one of the instances where it would have been okay to rest him. I don't think it was the second half of back-to-back. So I think that was the biggest thing. And I think that it maybe happened once before that. So I do think that it was convenient timing. But I also think that at least if the Pelicans didn't mean to, I think they certainly enjoyed it. And the fact that we wound up beating them anyway, despite all that, I thought was great, and I've loved the entire thing.
Yeah, that was a proud moment to actually be a Pelicans fan, and it's a fan base that really needed a spark. People really needed that, a little thrill. So I was glad that we got that, and I will say this: it seems like the Pelicans, especially the younger players, are definitely not giving up on this season. They're playing hard. We had an impressive win since the All-Star break, which started right before the All-Star break. We had the Orlando Magic loss, which was the embarrassing loss where Anthony Davis played and called out some of our players for not trying hard, even though he was the one who struggled in that game. And it seemed like everybody was saying that was when the height of frustration was at its peak with the Anthony Davis saga about resting him for the rest of the season. But since then, we had an impressive win against OKC. We had a road loss to the Pacers where AD only played 20 minutes. We had a great win against the Los Angeles Lakers, which had to feel very good for the Pelicans. And then we had a 1-point loss to the 76ers, who are a great team. And as Mason Ginsberg pointed out, AD, he left the game with 5:11 left in the third quarter. The Pelicans were down 15. And in the final 17 minutes, the Pelicans, without AD, the Pelicans outscored the 76ers 41-27, coming up just 1 point short for the win. Is there any merit to the idea that the Pelicans may be playing harder when AD's off the court?
I think if I had to guess, I would say that whoever is playing in AD's place is playing harder. So I wouldn't say, so as a collective, if all the four other people are the same and Davis is being replaced with someone who's working harder, then in sum, you are working harder as a team. That would be my guess about it. There does seem to be, like you said, there was some real tension before the All-Star break, especially in that Orlando game. I think that might have resolved itself some, and I think that's probably contributing a good deal. I think the fact that the Pelicans are playing a lot of hungry players and giving them a lot of minutes, I think that contributes for sure. It's not altogether unheard of to have a young team work this hard. One, they have fresher legs. Two, they don't know what they're doing, so they're just working as hard as they can. I think those things would all factor into the effort.
Right. It certainly seems like the Pelicans have really shown up to play more often than not when Anthony Davis is not on the floor. And maybe it's a pressure thing. Maybe they just feel more relieved and they're able to relax and just kind of play their game, for better or for worse. And it seems like, for the most part, it's been better lately. I hope it continues. But then again, you're always going to get the detractors, or I will say maybe even superfans, who say, winning isn't necessarily the best thing right now for the Pelicans. So it's kind of a catch-22 here. Like, you have fans who are really excited for the Pelicans playing well without AD, and then you also have the fans who are saying winning is not in the team's best interest right now because they want a chance at Zion Williamson, for example. Our fourth and final quarter of the show is our Best Questions segment, where we tackle your best questions. Reminder, you can tweet us your questions at BestPodcastNOLA using the hashtag BestQuestions, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show. All right, we have a question from Alejandro from Metairie. And Alejandro asks, Michael, who is the better coach for New Orleans, Monty Williams or Alvin Gentry?
My general opinion on all of this is that if a player wants to play hard, he's going to play hard. I think you can't teach someone to care, but I do think that you can bring out the best in people, and I think Monty had a really special talent for that in terms of the actual character building and stuff like that. I like Gentry just fine. I think Gentry's an okay coach. I didn't think that Monty was an exceptional coach either, so if I gave him a margin, it wouldn't be a huge one. So I'll go with Monty Williams, but by a smidge.
The frustration that I had from Monty Williams was based on I would always see the Pelicans get out to these third quarter leads, and they'd always blow it in the fourth. And a lot of that, of course, was players just kind of coasting, for three quarters, like our opponents, and then trying hard in the fourth quarter and coming back. But something with Monty Williams that always would frustrate me is that, yes, his teams would show up to play, but they would always blow fourth quarter leads. And that's one of my biggest memories of the Monty tenure here. Monty Williams had horrible injury luck with his players, right? His players were always hurt. And Gentry actually even hasn't been that much better in terms of the health department because, of course the Pelicans have had plenty of injuries under Gentry too. But it seems like Monty Williams really got the short end of the health stick. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, his was terrible. We had. It's like you're saying. It's been consistent. We've had bad injury luck for years now. To a crazy extent. So
I think a lot of that
they both
goes
had
on
it pretty
the health
bad
department, or not the athletic trainers, for example.
Well, it has to go somewhere. Look, so it could either be freak luck, it could be a bad training staff, or it could be the players that they're picking.
Right.
It's got to be one of those three things, right? So I think luck has to be some part of it. As far as the training staff, I don't know enough about the training staff. I know that we've had so many players who are injured, and correlation is not causation. So I don't.
It's worth posing the question.
I don't know.
I think it's worth posing the question.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea if they're up to snuff. That means nothing to me. So
yeah, it just does seem a little unfortunate that the Pelicans have been battling injuries for the last decade. Really, it seems like we haven't had really one or two good years in terms of above average health in the last decade. So let's move on to the next question. and that is from Eric in Houston, Texas. And Eric from Houston wants to know, what do y'all make of the Zion Williamson shoe explosion? And do you think he should ever step on the court again for Duke? And Michael, before you answer this, I also want to get into a little more about the Pelicans. I want to steer it a little towards the Pelicans after we talk about Zion, the college player, because I also want to know about the fans who are saying out there, is it worth it to maybe tank for Zion to even have just a little bit better percentage chance in the lottery to get this guy? But first, let's answer Eric's question. Let's talk about the shoe explosion. Michael, did you see it? And what were your initial thoughts of that?
I saw it, and it's terrifying. Even playing basketball, I mean, if you play basketball, you know that shoes are a big deal. One, if the floor is slippery at all and you don't have good traction, you can turn an ankle. You can do all kinds of things. It's a dangerous game to be playing if the court is just not well taken care of. So now all of a sudden your shoe's exploding. I mean, you're already coming down and jumping, and you're landing on people's feet and turning your ankles. There's a lot going on there. And when you see someone's shoe actually explode like that and their foot comes out of it on a cut like that, and that's dangerous. I don't know I can't point the finger. I'm not a shoe doctor either, but I mean, I don't know what they're doing wrong, but that's not encouraging. I wouldn't want to be wearing a pair of Nike shoes right now.
Yeah, according to Darren Rovell, Nike's stock actually dropped a little the next day, which is crazy. Yeah, true story there. And I know Zion Williamson is a huge guy, especially for a college player. And I know that he's a freak athlete and he's very strong, and his size and speed combination is deadly, of course. But it's not like he was really sprinting and then all of a sudden tried to make a hard cut, totally changing direction, and then, his shoe busted. This was more than a busted shoe, first of all. This was a total, really, explosion of the shoe, like Eric put it, actually. And also, I know he was changing direction, and I guess he was technically cutting, but he was kind of barely jogging when he made the cut. This wasn't like he was making a hard plant and change of direction. This was just it was more of almost like a pivot to me. And it made me wonder, well, if his shoe was that weak, really, it just made me wonder, this injury really could have been a lot worse than a knee sprain. It seems like he was kind of lucky to get away with just a knee sprain. But it begs the bigger question, though, Michael, and that is, should he suit up to play in the March Madness tournament and try to win a championship for Duke? Or do you think he should be only thinking about his future and there's millions of dollars on the line, and that he should do everything he can to protect his knee and himself from injury to make sure that he goes number one overall in this draft?
You look at someone like Zion Williamson, you talk about the explosion, you talked about how big he is. Look, that's a dangerous game to be playing. If you're talking about him losing that explosion, that's going to change how he is as a player pretty radically. I think you need to be very careful about, before you get that first. I mean, not that the first big contract in the NBA is going to be your rookie contract, but it's a lot of money still, and you don't want to be giving that up, because he, to me, is the clear-cut number one pick in this draft. And I don't think anybody would pass him up if he just had a minor injury. Now, if you talk about a serious injury, I mean, talk about Joel Embiid a few years ago. So, I mean, Joel Embiid had serious injury concerns, and that dropped him to 3. I think someone like Zion could drop a little bit further. And it's not a gigantic change in salary, but what if it's a lot worse than that? What if he has a serious injury? Right. I don't know. I think you have to look out for your own interest in this case. I don't mean to get upset about him doing something that's in the best interest of his team. That's certainly an unselfish thing to do, but I do think it's a short-sighted one. And I think his teammates would understand that he's going to be the number one pick in this draft. You can't be taking a substantial risk to win a tournament. And I hate to be that guy, but I mean, what's your take on it?
It's more than number one pick, right? This isn't like DeAndre Ayton of last year. I mean, this is a pick that teams are really proactively tanking for, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the best college. I think this is probably the best prospect since Anthony Davis, if you ask me. I think you could go back all the way to, I think it was 2012 that we drafted Davis, and I think it's that far to where you could find a player of his caliber.
Do you give him a pass if he skips the tournament?
I understand it, because what I've seen from Zion Williamson speaks to me that Zion Williamson is not at all a me first kind of guy. I think he has enough data on him where if you watch the guy, he seems genuinely interested in working with his teammates. He seems genuinely interested in winning in whatever way he can. If you look at things like that, that to me far outweighs what I would see as a calculated risk not to play, or actually calculated non-risk not to play. So I think if you look at all that stuff, I am just very high on him. He just seems like a great guy. And I think given how good he is as well, like that seems to me like a really, really good prospect, and I would not knock him for that.
I do have to set the record straight for the listeners. I am a Duke fan, okay? My father went to Duke Medical School. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. So I have to set the record straight. I've been to plenty of Duke games. You know, I have a piece of the tile floor. I have a ball signed by Krzyzewski. All kinds of, you know, Duke stories going back to when I was young. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. I mean, so I do watch Duke basketball quite a bit. But despite all of that, I do not think it's a good idea for Zion Williamson to step on the court again, whether he's healthy or not. Not only will it not upset me if he doesn't step on the court again, I will actually be probably more upset if he does step on the court again. And that's coming from a Duke fan, because I just think that it would be the wrong move for him. I'm very passionate about this subject. I believe that college players like Zion Williamson should be compensated. Now, whether it's by the university or whether it's by somebody else like Nike or whoever sponsors, I don't really care. And after studying sports law at Tulane, I think it's probably better to make the argument that if college athletes are ever going to get paid, it should probably be based on their name and likeness. So just based on their jersey sales and their video games and in their characterization in video games and stuff like that, to where you don't have to force the schools to pay these athletes, which, you know, then makes it essentially like a professional league where these schools are bidding, you know, monetary value for these players. But just have the players go play whatever college they want to, but then they get all the money for their jerseys. That's the kind of stance that I feel like college athletes should be compensated for. I think that's the most fair way to do it and the most logical way to do it. And the fact that the tickets to this game were around $3,000, and Zion Williamson isn't going to see any of that. None of that. And he hurt himself in the game. So one way to maybe even make playing more worth it for college athletes would be to compensate them. But until they're compensated, I say heck no. Don't you step on that court again. And I would actually have this opinion whether he got hurt or not. I think that Zion Williamson, it is not in his best interest to step on a court again, whether he's healthy or not. And I'm kind of rooting for him on the next level. I hope that he gets the best advice that he can and does not put himself at further injury risk until the draft.
Yeah, the whole thing about them not earning any money is absurd. I'm right there with you. I think it's, you know, the same way I was in accounting in college, slightly different from playing college basketball, and I was getting paid for an internship. I mean, no one was paying to watch me do accounting, but I think if you look at it objectively, they're doing work. If anybody that knows a college athlete, a D1 college athlete, that is a job, and those guys are at the very best of what they do. And they're not getting paid a cent for it while the school is profiting greatly off of them.
It is.
And don't give me that whole, like, he's getting an education. He is not there for an education.
He's one and done.
At
exactly.
All. Right.
Exactly.
And that's not a bad thing. Like, then just end this whole charade of having college sports if it's not for people who are really wanting to do college things. The whole thing is absurd to me, and I feel bad for them because I think that they deserve it, and I think that they're getting ripped off by these colleges.
But something has to change. It's either going to be the NBA dropping their one and done rule and making it again so where high school athletes can go straight to the NBA, or college sports are going to, the NCAA is going to have to start allowing compensation go to players. And I think the best way to do it, so you don't have all the controversy of having colleges proactively pay the players. I think the best way to do it is just have the players profit on their name and likeness. That's their merchandise sales, their jersey sales, et cetera, et cetera. So you have teams actively and directly tanking for Zion Williamson. And I want to know your thoughts on the Pelicans being one of those teams. And I've seen some knowledgeable Pelicans fans. I'm not going to call out any of my friends or fellow viewers of the show out on the air like this, but some knowledgeable Pelicans fans are actually more frustrated when we actually win a game. And you kind of have to balance the whole act of, like, you're excited to see the player development that we've talked about beforehand, but you also have to balance that with, do we really want to be winning right now? So I kind of want to get your take on whether it's worth it.
So tanking at this point would be very, very difficult. So the NBA restructured how it does its lottery odds. So for those of you who don't know, the top 3 teams, or I should say the bottom 3 teams this year, will each have a 14% chance to get that number 1 overall pick. So, but those teams have lost so many games where there's no chance we're catching them. And they're going to do the same thing for the rest of the year. So Phoenix, New York, Cleveland, even Chicago at number 4, Atlanta at number 5, all those teams are so far out of reach for the Pelicans that there's no chance, especially with Drew Holiday playing and Anthony Davis playing even in fewer minutes, that we're going to catch those teams. Okay. As of today, we have the 9th worst record. Now, realistically, Memphis is right after Atlanta in terms of worst record. So Memphis is 6th. Their pick is top 8 protected. So if they get a top 8 pick, it's theirs. But if it's not top 8, they don't get it.
So they have every incentive to tank, basically.
Exactly. So those 6 teams we're not catching, I don't think. I think maybe you could convince me that we would catch Washington or Dallas. So we're sitting at 9. You could convince me that we finish 7th or 8th. I don't think we're finishing any better, quote unquote, than 6th. So ultimately, you're talking about, let's just say our ceiling is 7, then you're going from a 4.5% chance at the top pick to a 7.5% chance.
Really? It's that high?
It's that high, yeah.
I thought it would be like a 1% chance.
It's higher than that. I mean, so yeah, again, it's 4.5 to 7.5 would be the range that if we finish today or worse than we did today, then it would be that. Now, the difference is not Zion, would be the difference from 20% chance right now at a top 4 pick to a 32% chance at a top 4 pick if we finish 7th. So that's where, to me, you see a bigger difference in and more of the incentive to tank is to get a top pick, not necessarily to get the top pick.
Right. We've been talking about Duke a lot. There's also 2 other Duke prospects who are projected to go in the top 7 or 8 players overall, Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett. I'd love to see one of them land with the Pelicans.
Okay, so our next question is from DZ from Franklinton, Louisiana. And he asks, I want to know what you foresee happening with the 2 Steelers, Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, and then the 2 local products, Landon Collins and the Honey Badger. Are the Saints a possibility for any of them?
I'm going to say no, straight up, to Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, the 2 Steelers. We only have $9 million projected to spend in the cap if the salary cap goes to $190 million per team like it's supposed to. So we don't even have a lot of money to spend on them. And, Le'Veon Bell is going to command way more than that. And Antonio Brown would be a trade, so we'd have to take his deal from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Saints also don't have draft capital. We also discussed earlier that, we don't have a first-round pick. We don't have a third-round pick or a fourth-rounder. So we can always trade next year's draft picks, but I don't think the Saints are going to mortgage their future. I understand that the window is closing for us to win a Super Bowl with Drew Brees, but I just don't think that Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell really move the needle for us on offense. I mean, they're receivers and running backs. I mean, they're not defensive line. They're not pass rushers. They're not quarterbacks. They're not offensive linemen. They're not offensive tackles. They're skill position players. And these are players that the Saints have always been able, Drew Brees and the Saints have always been able to make them look better than they are. They are not necessary for winning a Super Bowl. I mean, it sucks to say from a fantasy perspective, but Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell are simply not necessary to win a Super Bowl in today's NFL. I mean, the last time a team won a Super Bowl with an elite receiver, I honestly can't even remember it. I mean, the Patriots have not had an elite receiver in all this time. It's been quite some time since an actual elite receiver. I'm talking like an Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins, and A.J. Green. a Julio Jones, has won a Super Bowl. And this isn't to say that, you can't win with an elite receiver. It's not like an elite receiver hurts your team. But it's just to say that they don't move the needle, especially for the Saints. They're not necessary. We already have Michael Thomas, and we also already have Alvin Kamara. And I can't imagine everybody being happy in a locker room full of, Alvin Kamara and Le'Veon Bell, who's getting the touches there. And I also can't imagine Michael Thomas and Antonio Brown splitting the work as the alpha male at number one receiver, the X receiver there. So it's just the Steelers are just not going to happen for the Saints. If I had to pick a team for those Steelers, I'm going to say Le'Veon Bell probably goes to the New York Jets. That's my prediction there. They have a lot of cap room, and I think they kind of need a spark from their fan base there. And they also need to give Sam Darnold, a young quarterback, some help there. Antonio Brown, if I had to pick a team, I think it might come at this weekend, actually. The NFL Combine is this week, and that's when a lot of the owners get together and kind of evaluate trades. I could see him going to the San Francisco 49ers. That's going to be my guess for him. Right. As far as the safeties go, I think it's more realistic for the Saints to get them. Now, I don't think we have a huge need at safety, but the Saints have always shown a tendency. They're not afraid to play three safeties in a formation, and they're also not afraid to play our third safety as a nickel cornerback. And I always say a nickel cornerback, or that fifth defensive back, whether it's a safety or a corner, is essentially a starter in this league. Like when I talk about starters in the NFL, Michael, I always say starting lineups. I say each team has 12 starters. I'm always listing that slot receiver, and I'm always listing that fifth defensive back because they play more than 66% of snaps nowadays, so they're essentially a 12th starter. So the Saints, on paper, we obviously have Von Bell and Marcus Williams, who don't have an immediate need there. It wouldn't surprise me if the Saints kind of delved into the safety market to potentially have a guy like Tyrann Mathieu play that versatile role where sometimes he's playing nickel corner because we don't really know what to expect out of Patrick Robinson's health. He got hurt in the Atlanta game in week 3 and was out for the year. And he could also play a little bit of free safety for us in a 3-safety look. So Tyrann Mathieu's a guy who I would love for the Saints to have. He's a local guy, LSU all the way. He's one of really LSU's greatest players in a single season, to be honest. When we had that elite team, I actually thought that Tyrann Mathieu was our best player there. He's a great locker room guy, too. He's overcome so much. He's a great leader. He's a hard hitter. He's the type of guy I would love for the Saints to be eyeing in free agency, and I know that he would probably want to become a Saint as well. Landon Collins, a little bit. He also is a local guy, grew up in Baton Rouge, almost went to LSU. We decided to go to Bama instead, unfortunately for LSU fans. But Landon Collins is a guy that, a lot of fans really like him locally. I do think we're probably going to be priced out of his market. I know that safety's market has come down a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, but I would rather probably have Tyrann Mathieu for his price than Landon Collins for his price, even though Landon Collins is the better player.
Well, what are you looking for? So, we talk about Mathieu. The player that I remember Mathieu as was a playmaker. So, are you looking for someone who's an elite cover guy? I think you already said that. You said that Matthew's an elite hitter, but is this something to where our run defense is already really good, right? So, the help that we need is more in coverage. Is that correct? And if that's the case, are we looking for someone who's an elite cover guy, or are we looking for someone who's just going to be sort of like, you can be not an amazing cover guy, but still be a risk taker and make plays, get interceptions, go for fumbles. Like, what are you looking for in our secondary?
He's a playmaker and he's a risk taker, and he's a hard hitter. So I mentioned that he's great in run defense, but he's also had a couple sacks last year. He's a good pass rusher. Now, I won't say he's an elite cover corner because he's not. Because if he was an elite cover corner, we wouldn't even be in position for talking about him coming on the Saints because first of all, the Texans probably would have already re-signed him because not many teams let elite cover corners go to the free agency market. But second of all, he'd just be way out of our price range if he was actually an elite cover corner. He's not, and he is undersized. Remember, he's only about 5'8", 5'9", probably about 185 pounds. He's honestly, around my size, which is obviously not very big in terms of NFL standards at all. So I want to set the record straight. Matthew is bigger than I am, of course. But, about that, I shouldn't even be anywhere near, that size for an NFL cornerback. But Matthew is a smaller player, and that kind of hinders him in terms of when you have to match him up as free safety on like a tight end, for example. Like you'll have this tight end who's, maybe 6'5", 6'4", who can out-muscle Matthew. Now, he's up for the challenge, of course. He's always been a fiery guy. He's a very passionate player. But at some point, especially near the goal line, when height's kind of the main issue there, that can be kind of a weakness for him. But with that said, he's a jack of all trades. He's your Swiss Army knife. He can do it all. And again, he's the perfect fit for the Saints locker room. I really do want to get on board for, hopefully we can set a little recruiting pitch here and hopefully try to get Matthew on board for kind of going back to his hometown here, his home state, I'll say, and be a New Orleans Saint next year.
Yeah, what I look forward to, like I kind of feel like for years now, like I've really wanted a guy who, if you go back to that Super Bowl team, I think we had a lot of turnovers that we generated. And given how good our offense is, we don't necessarily need to be a stout defense. But if you can get a few takeaways during the game that you didn't have the season before, I think that makes a real impact on how much we win.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It really does. And if you have an elite offense like the Saints, just, even one turnover a game makes such a substantial, getting us one extra possession on offense, such a substantial difference there. And you don't really need your defense to be that great. When the Saints won the Super Bowl, you're alluding to it right there. When Darren Sharper was intercepting all those passes when he led the league in picks that year, the Saints had, in terms of yardage allowed, were like the 25th ranked defense, I believe, out of 32. They weren't that good in yardage allowed. But we were near the top of the league in turnovers, and that's really all that mattered. So you're absolutely right. Having a risk taker there like Tyrann Mathieu, he'd really fit our system really well. I'm rooting for this. And that's the end of our fourth quarter. If you like what you heard, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at BestPodcastNola. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our sponsors. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends. Who dat?